Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to North Lincolnshire Museum for the fourth in our programme of talks that links to the Based on Craftsman exhibition. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping and I'll hand over to our speaker. So, if the fire alarm goes off, it is a real fire alarm. We haven't got any tests today, and the nearest fire exit is this one here. Or we can head out the back door and down the circuit stairs, and the fire muster point is out the front of the museum. But Rebecca and I are both fire wardens, we will make sure that you all leave. We won't just run screaming from the building and leave you all to hope for the best. Toilets are in reception as well. So we've got a really great talk today by Dr. Steve Ashby from York University, who has over the years he's used parts of our collection for his research, just returned some objects today actually. So Steve's going to talk to us about some of the work that he's done, mapping the Viking world with artefact science. So if you have any questions, please do keep them in mind, and we'll have a bit of time for question and answer at the end as well.
Great, thanks very much. Very nice to be here. Yeah, that's very sad. Been a little while since I've been here, so it's a nice chance to return some stuff you can hang on to as you like. So what I do is I specialise in Viking Age and in craft, so it kind of ties in quite nicely in the exhibition here at the moment. Craft and technology, basically what people made in the Viking Age, and what I've been interested in as a way of using that kind of material is to think about how people make things, how they use them. And where they got materials from, those kind of questions. But rather than focusing on it just as being about the crafting itself, trying to use that to answer bigger questions about the Viking Age, about when the Viking Age started, what the Viking Age was like, who was in contact with who, those kind of big questions. Which is kind of what artifacts is always used to be. But then it kind of got pushed aside for a long while, and people started to focus on landscape and building, that sort of thing. We've forgot about artifacts. Well, we did, but the rest of the world did. And so I've been trying to kind of bring these ideas back to the kind of centre of kind of Viking studies. I'm going to go. I'll try and go reasonably slowly. There's quite a lot to go through, but if you don't understand anything, please just stick your hand up. Do my best to explain. I'm going to go slowly because we have to totally change slides. No. It's change now. Thank you. Yeah. So the objects that I really care about are things that that sort of ordinary people use, everyday objects. Not ships, not treasure, not swords, that sort of thing. Things more like cooking pots and shoes and hats and that sort of thing. And one of the most important crafts was the working of animal bone. And in the Viking Age, people would make anything from bone. Anything from pins to tools for working textiles, bits of sword handles, ice skates, all those kind of things. And most of those things can be made if you have access to finer bone, basically, and a bit of time on your hands. It was all pretty sort of unspecialised, and if you had a knife and a bit of time, you could make a lot of these objects. But there are a few exceptions. The biggest exception of these was headwears, which is what I've spent probably the best part of 20 years working with. And next slide. And these certificates codes were made by experts with specialised skills, specialised tools, specialised raw materials, and I'll go through each of those ideas. They all those different ideas kind of help us to use the subject to kind of say different things about life and Viking Age. The next slide. You'll see some of these codes in the exhibitions. There's some from York in the exhibition upstairs here, but there's also in the museum's own collections. There are pre-Viking codes in places like Blitzborough, places like Castledyke South, from the cemetery at Cleveland. So there's a long tradition that goes back to sort of the end of the Roman period. And as you can see, they can be really ornate. This is a very unusual example with teeth sort of originally would have teeth going all the way along this bottom edge. They're just halfway along the top edge. It's not a very common design at all. But you can see it's quite ornate. A nice decoration on here. It's not something you throw together. It's not throwaway objects. It's probably quite a special kind of treasured item. The next slide. And these are a few more examples from sort of around the sort of Viking medieval world. This is a kind of from Scotland, the sort of Pictish world. These are really unusual combs, and basically there are lots of this kind of short, stubby, round-backed form, but they're all different. No one of them is like anything else. Every one of them is kind of unique. It looks like sort of jewellery. We get these kind of combs, which are very common in the kind of early Viking Age, very, very nicely made combs. And these are kind of both what you might call late Norse. They come from the medieval world, but in Scandinavia and places like Orkney and Shetland. This design, I've never seen one quite like this. It's massively over-engineered, really, really fragile. With your names, and just shows that in that particular context, these combs are not just about combing your hair; they're showing things. I often sort of like them to sort of designer watches. They have a job, but they're very showy. And this example down here they've been found. Some of these combs have been found in the islands of Scotland, and these were published in the early 2000s. We've argued that these are supposed to represent fillets of fish. And these are the property of kind of fish merchants and fishermen in Orkney and Shetland. I don't really buy that, to be honest, but it looks that much of a fish, to be honest. But it just shows that it's not just purely functional design, there's aesthetics and ornament that goes into it. So it's not a quick and easy job to make these. Working with people who make combs today, you're probably talking about 2 days from start to finish to make one without all the decoration. And I think that's partly why these are so valued, is that amount of effort that goes into them. It's a way of saying you're a person who matters. They're not just for the high status, they're not just for the kings and kind of high elite, but that you're a person of some sort of status. You're certainly not a slave having these kind of objects. And I think probably one thing that happens when you go through the Viking Age is they go from being the sort of things which kind of the elite had to be something which was kind of more aspirational. You could buy them at the market and congregate and that sort of thing. So they continue to be a status item, but slightly different. Okay, should we move on? I'm going to talk quite a lot about how combs are made, both by looking at the combs themselves. Next slide. But also looking at the waste, the manufacturing waste, and what was left behind from making them. We have quite large deposits of these. They tend to be found in towns. So in the Anglo-Saxon period, it seems that you sometimes get things like comb making happening in sort of high-status rural contexts. But in the Viking Age, it's nearly always in towns. Oh, did I just change that? Lift up. So I can work technology. So good. And so one of the things we can do is we can look at these piles of waste and try to reconstruct the way in which these objects were made. And see that they're all made in the same way in different parts of the world. And that includes something about contact between places. I think it's quite useful to think about technology and the way people make things as an idea that travels around. That can tell you how much people are in contact. And one of the ways we can get at this a bit better is to actually do what we call experimental archaeology, which is to look at the way that people make these kind of objects today. And you can go to parts of the world where they still make combs in a kind of fairly using the same sorts of materials. Places like India, for instance, they still make combs broadly this kind of way. But it's not quite the same. One thing you can do is to work with people who consciously reenact the kind of manufacturing of these objects from the Viking Age. And one of the things that I did, I got started working with a guy called Jim Glasser about 25 years ago. He was the first person to show me how to make a comb. And these are some of his images that when I first met him 20 years ago. He's now my PhD student. But he's and most of the information I've got about the process and the experience of manufacturing combs comes from him. So what do we know about it? Okay, right. Okay. Right. The first thing you have to do is you have to break the apple up. Combs are a quite specialist object. They're made of special materials, so they're made of nearly always in the Viking Age. They're made of deer antler. So in there's a period in the sort of what we call Middle Saxon period, so the years just before the Viking Age, where bone from things like long bones of cattle and horses sometimes does seem to be used in making combs. The Vikings don't seem really interested in that. They only want to use deer antler, and we can talk about why that might be afterwards. But the key thing is that seems to be a fact. They think the combs are made out of deer antler. So the first thing you do is you've got to break up the antler, and that seems to be done fairly systematically. Often, I think, with large axes. But again, there's some variation depending on the way you look. This is done in slightly different ways. You break the beam up into short lengths, And you can then split that beam open using a hammer, sometimes using a wedge made of another piece of antler. So you get the tip of an antler tine, hammer it into the top of your beam of antler, and it splits it apart. And that gives you kind of sort of four or five sort of segments, which you can then kind of rasp away and file away the internal surfaces. You have a look at this picture down here, you can just make out the inside of it is all kind of spongy, and that material is no good for making cones. It rasps away very easily, you can't cut it like that. The first thing you need to do is you kind of rasp all that away, so you've got some nice flat plates, really kind of solid, what we call compactor, really kind of solid sort of bone material. And then you can polish the surface, and you do this using tools which are very similar to carpenter's tools. There's a lot of overlap between the kind of work of the carpenter and the work of the people do this kind of thing. They're more like carpenters than they are like butchers, for instance. They're using a really different toolkit to butchers. And then once you've done that, you can shape and polish the plates. We get two long plates, which we put in pairs, long plates like this. You shape and polish them, and then become what we call side plates, I suppose connecting plates on the cone. Then make a number of smaller ones, which we call tube plates. These little kind of sort of squarish little plates. Go through basically the same process, and then you array them together, and you fit them together using rivets, little metal pegs usually, little nails. And then once you've got them all fitted together, you smooth it off, you cut your teeth, polish your teeth, and you finish it off. You kind of finish it with a kind of an abrasive, maybe some shark skin or something, just to kind of bring it to a polish. And then you've got your finished cone. So you see, it's quite a long, protracted process. And everyone who's really written about cones produces a diagram which looks something like this, which shows the process of going through the steps from start to finish. It's always seemed like a kind of systematic, straightforward way of making a cone. This is the way you always do it. But actually, when you look at it in detail, almost at every one of these steps, cutting the antler into pieces, rasping it down, fixing them together, putting decoration on, putting the two plates in, riveting it together, polishing it. And every one of those is a choice to be made. And what you see, if you look carefully enough, you see variations in this practice as you go around the world. And that was one of the things I focused on when I was doing the PhD, was to try to see, can you use this to work out where a particular cone was made? Can you identify schools of manufacture and that sort of thing? And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But just to give you an example of some of the things you can do, which are quite useful. Let's give you one example of this, and that's to look at the rivets, the little metal pegs that you use to hold all this together. So in some parts of the Viking world, they use iron for this. In Ireland, you quite often find bone pegs being used. And in much of Scandinavia, particularly in the end of the Viking Age, going into the medieval period, you see copper alloy rivets, so bronze, brass. And those copper alloy rivets, they can be solid, they can be copper alloy plating another metal, or you might be able to make out in here. You can just see that all these are separate little rivets. This is super zoomed in. You can see here, this one's got a little hole in the middle. That one has got a little hole in the middle as well. It's because it's a piece of copper alloy sheet which has been rolled around and then keyed in with a little hammer. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. And there isn't really a particular logic here. Some of it is about decorative aesthetics, I guess, about kind of trying to make it look as nice as possible. But there's not a kind of clear efficiency logic to it. It's not as straightforward as you might think. And that becomes even more true if you look at another aspect of riveting, where you put the rivets. And this is one of the things that I focused on quite a long time ago. So on here, this is 3 types of cone. Just look at these the black dots. These are rivets. And you can see in each of these, the rivets have been placed in different positions. So at this top one here, this is what I call the alternating edge style. So you always have them in the end phase, But then after that, you've got a rivet between these two plates here. Then the next edge there, you haven't got a rivet. And that edge there, you have got one. And then you haven't got one there. Then you have got one there. So every 2 plates can kind of have one rivet holding it in place. I call that alternating edge style for obvious reasons. There's another variation, which I call every edge. So at every single edge, you've got a rivet there. And then there's another style here where you get the rivet through the centre of the plate, rather than at the edge at all. Now you think logic will tell you there's an efficient way to do this. You find a way that uses the minimum amount of iron, minimum amount of materials, and some smaller patterns. But actually what you see is there's different things used in different places. Now, if you look anywhere in the sort of Anglo-Saxon, British or Irish world, even Denmark as well, this is what you see. It's an alternating edge pattern. Very rarely see these patterns. If you go into Scandinavia, in Denmark, you see a bit of a mixture of all of them. But in Norway and Sweden, you don't tend to see the alternating edge one, you see a mixture of these ones. So there's different ways of doing it, and probably 20 years ago, this would be interpreted in terms of identity. People are expressing their identity in terms of where they put the rivets in the cone. I don't really buy that. I think probably what's going on is that you make the cone in the way that you think is the right way to make a cone, the way that you were taught to make that cone. And I'm pretty sure if you ask any of these cone makers why they do it that way, they would say, this is how to make a cone. There isn't another way to do it. That won't work if you do it that other way. So traditions get passed down. And so unless you get it forced upon you, there's no reason to shift and do things in a slightly different way. And my idea was, hopefully, if you look at this, you start to use these kind of ways of tiny differences in the way that objects is made to track movement. Can you see whether cone found in Europe was really made in Europe or whether it was made somewhere else? And actually, there are a few examples of that where we have been able to track that. So there are very few cones actually done from Europe, which I would be fairly confident that they come from overseas. There are 4 or 5 examples that I say, yeah, that's from Scandinavia. And we can pick them out quite clearly. And we've tested that using other methods to check out the right, and it turns out they're not. And the way that we tested that is using another method, which is looking at the raw materials, so the objects, so the materials that the objects themselves are made of. And that's probably what I've spent, certainly the last 10 years, to do a lot of research on. And I thought I'd give you a little research story to kind of be the second half of the talk, really, just to explain how this works. And that will tie in to take us from this, focusing just on the object, and thinking about how it answers some bigger questions and how it tells us about the Viking Age for people who don't care about cones, which is most of the world. So to give you this little story, I thought I'd start off with how I started out. So back in the 1990s, there was a big debate about how the Viking Age began. And it's never really gone away, to be honest, despite my best efforts. The question is whether the Vikings really appeared from nowhere in Britain. Were they this kind of amazing, kind of like terrifying sight on the horizon, nothing like anyone had ever seen before? Or were the Scandinavians already known to us in Britain, and something just changed, and they became violent, they fell out of us, they found different ways of of getting wealth out of us, and so they changed their tactics. And it'd always been argued up until the 1990s. The main model was that Scandinavia rather than Britain were genuinely living. And then from the early 1990s, it's been argued, actually, no, maybe there's a longer history of contact between Scandinavia and Britain. It just isn't very well evidenced. If you look carefully into the evidence, you can find examples of this. And there were 4 or 5 types of evidence that kind of supported this long sort of pre-history of contact. And I won't go into detail of all of them. But what I will say is that over the last 20, 30 years, 3 of them have been disproven. And what we were left with is this, the cones. And this relates to Scotland. And it had been argued that these sorts of cones here, which are not Viking-type cones, that's important thing to say, these are really stereotypically British, Irish, Scottish types of cone. This sort of cone here you get all the way across England and Scotland, Ireland into sort of the Netherlands as well, but not really in Scandinavia. These types of cones, this type of cone here is pretty sort of Irish and sort of Irish Sea sort of area. This sort of cone you get right across Orkney and Shetland and into the Western Island as well. So they're quite distinctively British cones, they're insular cones. And some work was done on these in the early 1990s, where they put them under a microscope and they said, well, these cones are made of reindeer. They've made of reindeer armour. So there's no reindeer in Scotland at this point. So there must be some level of contact with Scandinavia itself. It must be probably that we've got merchants of Scandinavia coming into Orkney and Shetland, bringing reindeer armour to help the locals make these cones. On that basis, it might sound a bit silly, but actually we know that around about this time in Orkney and Shetland, there wasn't a big deer population. Even in sort of mainland Scotland, deer population was getting smaller, I think. And so you've got a choice. If you're living in Shetland, to get your antler, you've got to go all the way to sort of mainland Scotland, or you've got to go across to Norway. There's not actually that much difference. If contacts were already there, you probably would use that model. So the problem is that the evidence for these cones being made of reindeer antler, which is by someone looking at it under a microscope. And if you've got a whole antler, it's very easy to tell different reindeer. They look very different. We've got tiny little pieces where the person making the object has tried their hardest to get rid of every little ugly piece of the antler. Every bit which might help you to tell what species it is becomes quite difficult. But there are a couple of people who thought they could do this, and they argued these were reindeer. So my PhD started out to test this, trying to really kind of work out, could we really see whether these were reindeer or not? And I spent a long time on this, and after kind of 4 or 5 years of looking at it, talking to lots of zoologists and things, doing blind tests using different methods, I came to the conclusion that some of them were probably reindeer, but most of them weren't. But all the ones I thought were probably reindeer, I couldn't be convinced they were actually really there before the Viking Age began. They were from what we call a kind of loose context, so you couldn't say they were clearly pre-Viking. So they could be in a kind of a native kind of British style, but still be made after the Scandinavians came to England. So they didn't necessarily tell us anything about early contact with Scandinavia. And that was, I thought, a fairly okay solution. I'm reasonably happy with that. And then the minute that I finished my PhD, I got a call from this guy, Matthew Collins. This is a very young me. He was a professor at York, just started at York, having been at Newcastle. And he came up with this biomolecular method to identify species. So it works in much the same way that DNA does, but it's really cheap, really fast, really reliable. And DNA isn't lots of movements. And we've been trying this in the final years of my PhD to make this work. It never worked. And basically, the minute that the PhD went in, we can do it now. So we sat about doing it all over again, go back to Orkney, looking at these cones, applying this new method. And it's been really revolutionary. So this is a method called zooms, zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry. I won't go into the detail of it all. It's quick, it's cheap. It uses very, very small samples. That's me taking a sample a long time ago there. Basically, the size of your sample is a dot that you put in your finger, so really, really small. And that gives it an advantage over things like DNA, because DNA takes quite large samples. And it's also, when you get DNA results, you get quite high resolution results. You can probably distinguish one reindeer population from another in different parts of Norway. So you can't do that using this technique. But the trouble with DNA is that you can't always be sure you're going to get a result at all. If DNA is not always well preserved. This technique doesn't rely on DNA, it relies on the protein, and that's much better preserved. And so you need small samples, it's cheap and quick and easy to sample, and you can nearly always get a result. The only time that I found that I haven't got a result is where the sample I've taken has been too small, so absolutely tiny, or usually because the objects have been burned. So this is not going to work on a cone of people. If it's been cremated, it's not going to work at all. But if you've got an unburned cone, it's really, really reliable. And so you can imagine if you've got a method which can tell you what something is made of, which is quick, it's cheap, you can do lots of samples, it doesn't destroy the object very much. It's popular for lots of reasons. One is it allows you to do large amounts of material. So one of the ways I think I've done with this is to apply it to big piles of manufacturing waste. So if I had a pile of, let's say, 4,000 pieces of aluminium, I couldn't do DNA on them. It'd be so expensive on the company, hundreds of thousands. But to do it with zooms, I could do a few hundred of these relatively cheaply, quite quickly, easily. The other way you can do it is you can apply it to finished objects. So the kinds of objects which would be on display in the museum, which you probably wouldn't be able to do with DNA on very much, even a big hole with it. But through this method, you can be quite kind of subtle about where you take the sample from and make it almost invisible. DNA is getting better, and now we are able to kind of take smaller samples. This still is really, really kind of really quite clever. And it's been used for all sorts of things. So it started off early on being used by zoo archaeologists, so people who specialise in animal bone, to tell the difference between species they couldn't identify. So sheep and goats have for a long, long time been the kind of either thing that zoo archaeologists get excited about if they can tell the difference, or annoyed by if they can't tell the difference. And this allows you to basically tell the difference very easily. It's almost like you kind of put it in a box. It tells you what species it is. That's one thing it's been used for. But it's been used for a range of other things, like identifying fish, different kinds of species of fish in very, very small samples. Even eggshell, we can distinguish different species of eggshell. But one of the problems with that is you've got lots of eggshell in the deposit, and you identify you've got 400 pieces of chicken here and 300 pieces of duck. You don't know, is that 400 and 300 eggs, or is it one egg broken into 400 pieces, another one broken into 300 pieces? So it's kind of complicated, but it's still something we couldn't do previously. We've done some work on marine mammals, so it's quite good on differentiating dolphin, whale, and that sort of thing. We just had a project published last year, actually, where we looked at game pieces from right across Sweden to see if they were nearly always made of whale bone. What kind of whale were they using? And they were always using the same species, they were always using right whale, which we used to suggest, well, that's targeted hunting, rather than just going for what happens to be wanted on the beach. It's more of a kind of active approach. It's also been applied to parchment. So this is one of the kind of really revolutionary kind of breakthroughs. That you can apply to documents which are made of red parchment, which is made of kind of calf or goat skin. You can go through a book now, and you can sample each of the pages and see whether each of the pages is made of different material. So you can look at the history of how that thing was made together, and that allows you to see whether it's all made as a single process, whether pieces have been inserted at later dates, and all sorts of clever things. And the reason this works, like letting you go and cut pieces of manuscript, but because with a manuscript we found, the way that it works, we get a pencil eraser and you rub the eraser on the manuscript, and the collagen that's in the parchment gets taken up into the rubber shaving thing or not, and then you sample the rubber shaving, and it tells you what that was made of. It doesn't work with bone objects, so it's very annoying. I thought I was going to be able to take my pencil eraser with me. Okay, so we applied this to that's all happened kind of since this initial one. One of the first projects that we tried on was these cones. Don't worry about this data table, you don't need to see that. What I did was I looked at a number of cones from pre-Viking and Viking contact in Scandinavia and in Scotland, sorry, and pre-Viking and Viking types of shapes. And so which ones are made of red deer, which ones are reindeer? I'm going to show you the graph in a minute. And if it's reindeer, it's going to have lots of blue on it. If it's red deer, it's got lots of red in it. And it's all red. So type 2, type 11 and 12, these ones here, these are the ones that have been identified as being reindeer previously. And they all came back as being red deer. And we backed this up with DNA, did some DNA as well, just to make it. And as I said, DNA doesn't always work so well, so we didn't always get results out of DNA. But where we did, it proved that our new method was right. So what we showed there is that where there had been this argument that there was reindeer in these pre-Viking cones in Scotland, there actually isn't. They're made of red deer. So one of the long-held kind of arguments for there being a long history of contact between Scandinavia and Britain is now gone. Now, I could probably stand here and say that's proven that now, right? So the Scandinavians arrive on the horizon, and they come in and they're brand new force, and everyone's terrified of them. That's what we read in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is genuinely true. They were terrifying it. We don't really know that. Instinct still tells you that there's some level of kind of scoping activity that's going on before those first raids. How do they know where to go? It's kind of in a complete mystery. But what is clear is we don't have any evidence for them. It's just not there after actually. Okay, so that's what we got through that, and that was quite a nice little finding. But it did make me wonder what else we could do with it. And so I thought, well, what about Scandinavia? Why don't we go and have a look at Scandinavia? And so I got working with some colleagues of mine who works in Denmark. And thought, we've seen the evidence that this will pick up evidence for reindeer outlet being moved. So maybe even if we can't see reindeer outlet coming from Scandinavia to Scotland, maybe we can see it being moved around in Scandinavia itself. And one of the things that you get in the start of the Viking Age is the birth of towns, and that's particularly kind of South Scandinavia, so around Denmark and the kind of southern ends of Norway and Sweden. You start to get kind of towns starting to form. And you don't have reindeer in those areas. Reindeer's coming from further north, either from the sort of inland areas kind of central Norway and Sweden, or right up in the Arctic. So we thought, well, can we see if we're getting reindeer out there appearing in homes or in manufacturing ways in these towns in southern Scandinavia? That would tell us something about levels of contact and movement and how Scandinavia is sort of organised. And what we did, we focused on a town called Ribe in Denmark. This is the oldest town in Scandinavia. It's probably the kind of first Viking town, if you want to use that term. And so we thought, if we see reindeer that over there, we know we're getting contact with Norway, which is right up here. And if you're getting that level of contact, it's probably not happening over land. It's probably coming by the sea. So you're probably getting evidence of maritime contact. People should be thinking around in boats. And believe it or not, this is not something we know very much about in Viking Age. Once you get into the Viking Age proper, in the 10th, 11th centuries, you have a good sense of kind of how people are moving around, how towns are connected, that kind of thing. Start of the Viking Age is still a bit of a mystery, really. And we picked Ribe because it has an unusual sort of what we call a stratigraphy, so it's a sequence of layers. It's got a really, really nicely estimated sequence that they done in the 1980s and 90s, whereby a strange coincidence of kind of having wooden material in there that can date well, and having objects from other parts of the world which have very precise dates on them. We can date these layers very, very precisely, sometimes to sort of 10 or 20 years. And that means that if we see reindeer antler in one of those levels, we can say reindeer antler is coming from Norway and from Sweden at that date. Not just that it's coming there, but we know what date and what it's coming there. And they've done some more recent excavations there, right next door to where these came from, which has found even more kind of high resolution kind of fine stratigraphy. And the nice thing is that the same methods we applied here, it matches. It's the same pattern. So what we did, again, don't worry about detail here, but each of the levels on this table indicate a phase, kind of period of kind of 20 years or so at Ribe. And so we went looking for reindeer antler in each of these levels. And the Viking Age begins traditionally 790s, or we think of the Viking Age beginning. And so traditionally been thought of as the Viking Age, where there's a lot of kind of long range travel and trade start to take off, exploitation of kind of mountain areas. So we tend to think about taking off in the sort of Viking Age as well. And what you just see, we can push this back any further. And so what we found was, first thing, this here we've got 2 pieces of reindeer antler in phase B. So this is the very start of the 8th century. So nearly 100 years ago, the Viking Age is supposed to begin. And these aren't loose pieces of antler; these are finished cones. So this looks like someone has come from mountainous or Arctic Norway and brought their cone with them and left it here, deliberately or accidentally, but found their way to Ribe with these cones. And we did so. We got some radiocarbon dates and typologically it all matches. It's 8th and 8th century. Now that might not seem very surprising or interesting, but when we did this work, there was a lot of debate about whether Ribe actually really existed as a town. But what it suggests is that it exists enough that people in a long, long way away, in the mountains, knew to come. That's the first finding. But then we get a lot of period here, 2 or 3 phases where there's no reindeer antler at all. And then it pops up again in phase E. You go across here to where phase E is, 780 to 90 is exactly where the Viking Age is supposed to begin. So archaeologists quite often like to disagree with historians. We might like to kind of think that the 790s is not really significant, nothing really changed around there, but actually it looks like it does make very significant. And this is, as I said, is matched with the recent work into the Ribe as well. So we're talking about small numbers of pieces of outline. We sampled kind of hundreds of pieces of outline, and we're talking about kind of less than 20 pieces of it. But each of these is in a different deposit, different kind of separate workshop deposit. So it looks like there's not a massive material coming in, but a kind of systematic use of red deer outline as a kind of top-up material. So you're using your local red deer outline, but you're also using reindeer to kind of add to it. And what we argue this means is that you go from having a contact with Northern Scandinavia earlier on to something more systematic round about the 790s. And there are lots of things changing that when you start to see the periods of glass beads coming in from the Middle East. We start to see different relationship with the sort of the Frankish world at that point. We have the records and the chronicles and the raiding aspect. So it does seem that at that point you've got a kind of taking off of kind of activity. Everything kind of picks up. But we demonstrate we do have this kind of long period of contact. And so what we've argued there is that you've gone from a situation where we thought everything kind of began at the start of the Viking Age, but we're actually what you're seeing is that there's a kind of long history that goes back. The people are travelling around on boats a long time before this kind of raiding activity we know about is happening. One of the other long arguments people have about the Viking Age is it all about raiding from the off, or does trading begin? They begin with kind of trading activity, and then it kind of turns violent. Kind of another way of looking at the same question we looked at in Scotland. But whereas in Scotland we found don't have any evidence of that early activity. In Scandinavia we did. People are travelling around on boats over long distances a long time before the Viking Age tradition begins starts. And it's just a start of trend. So when we looked at what goes through later into the Viking Age, here the purple is reindeer antler. So you've just got a little amount, but as you go through the phases, by the time you get into the end of the Viking Age, there are quite a lot of reindeer antler. It's not the main material, it's still local red deer and bone and things are main materials, but reindeers become more and more important. As you get into the medieval period proper, so into the 12th and 13th centuries, you start to get reindeer on a huge scale. Particularly in the towns in Norway, it seems that what they're doing is they're going up into the hill and they're tracking reindeer, hunting reindeer on quite a large scale, bringing this out down into the towns. And they're kind of mass producing homes at that point, huge numbers of homes. And what's interesting from a kind of sociological point of view is that this is a point where in Britain, in England in particular, we've forgotten about these kind of homes before. We don't care anymore. Northern conquest has happened, and for some reason or not, we're not making these homes anymore. In Scandinavia, they're doing it even more than they ever before. But we see, so what we're seeing as being a kind of 11th and 12th century phenomenon, we've managed to push right back into the sort of 8th century. So that was where we got, that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago we published that one. And that got me thinking again. We looked for reindeer antler in Scotland, didn't find it. Looked for it in Reba, so it's called all the way up here. Down to Reba. So we're like, okay, well, it's coming now. Maybe it's coming further south still. I mean, the other big town in this area is a place called Hedeby. Hedeby is the biggest of all the Viking Age towns. It's often seen as a kind of gateway to continental Europe for obvious reasons. Let's see where it is. And we thought, well, what if you can see any reindeer around there? And my suspicion was, well, we didn't see very much at Riga. So you might see a little bit less at Hedeby, but hopefully we'll get a bit. So what we did was we had a look at material from Hedeby, and this is actually work by my PhD student, Mariana Munoz Rodriguez. And one of the problems with Hedeby, you remember I mentioned at Riga, the great thing about Riga is it's got this really good stratigraphy. Lots of short levels that you can date things really precisely. Hedeby don't have that, and a lot of it is a bit of it's a mixture of layers that got messed up because they're a really complicated sequence of kind of way the buildings have been built and fallen down again. It's very complicated. So you can't very easily say this layer is from the 9th century, the 10th century. What's nice about cones though is you can date them, what we call typologically, by looking at the form and the decoration of the shape. And that allows you to say, broadly, this is a 9th century type cone, this is a 10th century type cone. And so what we did was we
brought together 4 or 5 different typological schemes, ways of dating cones, all developed by different people, put them all together, and use that to come up with a structure using sampling cones that we thought we could date fairly precisely. And then once we date it precisely, can we see the data? And what we found, again, didn't forget to look at some detail, but here, blue is radium. There's an enormous amount of radium there. And these are all 9th century times. So I won't bore you with the later Viking stuff. The later Viking stuff, which is 10th and 11th century, is nearly all red here, all nearly local. There's just one phase in the 9th century where they've gone mad for radium. And the initial reports of the estimation of the struggled to find much evidence of code making from this very early phase. And so we've talked to some of the excavators who've been there since, they still think it's not really there. So it's very likely there's a phase, this early phase of this kind of biggest Viking town where nobody's actually making codes locally, they're all being imported. And they're all being imported from probably Norway. So that was a bit astounding to me. I kind of was expecting to find 1 or 2, but I think we tested 50 cones and 46 of them were radium and 4 or 5 of them we couldn't really tell. So it was pretty clear cut, just for this particular type. Now the really interesting thing about that is when you focus on a couple of different subsets of that cones. So I call all these all cones that look broadly like I think type 5. I'm not as obsessive about the fine detail. But one of my colleagues has divided this same type into about 50 different subtypes. And he's really interested in types 23 to 26, which are these forms that have like ring and dot decoration on them, often in S-shapes or figure eights. And in particular, there's one form of that which he calls it type 23C, which looks like this. And these are often been referred to as Frisian cones from the Netherlands. And that's because they were first identified in a place called Dorestad in the Netherlands. They've since been found in more places than that, but there's still been a kind of like these are visible cones. So well, this is a good test. They haven't got reindeer. So if these made of reindeer, then we were they probably artisan. And I thought we'd again find a bit of a mixture, and we didn't really. We found they were nearly all 10 out of 11 of them made of reindeer. So the next job is to go to Frisia and to see if we can find deposits of reindeer there that suggest they're importing raw material to make it. I think probably not going to find that. I think it's probably a myth, actually. They probably come from Scandinavia, Western Scandinavia. But just to test that, we went to Frisia and we looked at some of these cones. So, okay, let's have a look at these cones that I thought would be Frisian. And let's have a look at them actually in Frisia. And what we found is that we tested a large number of different types of cone. Most of them came from us being made of red deer antler. This particular type, 10 of 11 of them were made of reindeer. So I suspect if you find these in this area of the Netherlands now, they're not evidence of local manufacture, they're probably like evidence of Scandinavians being in the area, having visited them elsewhere. And that's quite interesting. There's been a growing interest over the last probably 10 years or so in how Scandinavian, in inverted commas, this part of the world really was. The colleagues over there who are looking at all sorts of kind of indicators of Scandinavian presence, and they've just added this to their list of things to look for. Quite nice. So that just gives you a bit of a taste of the kind of some of the things we've been doing. But this is all working towards a book I've just got a contract for, and I'm hoping to publish over the next 3 or 4 years, where we're going to look at cones from across the whole of Northern Europe, really, and using this method, see what it can tell us about the way that people moved around, where they communicated. What I haven't done very much today is talk anything about cones from England or even Britain at all. And we actually haven't done very much of that. So we've done some analysis of cones from Yorkshire, where it's all been fairly local. But there have just been a few bits and pieces that I've done, quite often with students as part of their kind of master's or PhD projects. And just to kind of test whether this can give us some insight into what's going on in England. So these are 3 cones from York. These are 2 cones which I thought of, but I thought of as being probably actually Scandinavian, rather than made in a kind of Scandinavian style, probably actually imported from Scandinavia. And they both came back as reindeer. And they're late Viking or even post-Viking style. So the chances are there's evidence of Scandinavians in your African Viking Age. If you know really happened, it's nice to see kind of evidence like that. And then this is probably the weirdest came over the scenes. It came from a place in York called the Fisher Gate, so just before the Viking Age. It's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It's a really strange cone, and I never know what to make of it. And I suspected that maybe it might be from the Netherlands or somewhere like that. But we just tested to see what it was, and it came back as red deer or possibly elk. If it's elk, it's certainly not local. It probably has come from somewhere like the Netherlands or perhaps in Scandinavia. We can't tell you yet. This is probably a good candidate for actually doing DNA on, if then we know for sure. It's a nice little story. So we published at Christmas last year. I was thinking we must publish about reindeer at Christmas. This is a cone found by metal detectors in Shetland in Suffolk. We've very few cones found by metal detectors. But he was walking on the sort of the foreshore, the river down there, and found this cone and reported it, and did absolutely everything by best practice. Reported it. Immediately they had sent it to me and the colleague Ian Riddler as well. We both had a look at it, and that was interesting. It's pretty Scandinavian to me. They sent it up to me. We had it tested in zoos. We also did a 3D model of it and all sorts of kind of clever sort of visualization techniques and read an article about it. And long and short of it, reindeer antler stylistically quite Scandinavian. It's evidence of somebody probably from Scandinavia being in that part of the world in the sort of early part of the 10th century. And we don't actually have a lot of you have no cones like this, so people what we need from cones. And then this is the cone I haven't looked at yet. I'm going to look at this on Thursday this week. This is a cone from a place called Pesket in the forest, which is it's a grave in the Lake District. One of the interesting things you get in England, we actually don't have many of the sort of pagan graves that you think of in Scandinavia, those kind of traditional Viking graves, lots of grave goods. Don't have very many of them. And lots of what we do have are in the northwest. And they've often been interpreted as being rather than it being a community of people who actually come over direct from Scandinavia, this might be people who've actually come from Scandinavia into Ireland. They set up a sort of a colony in Dublin, and they get thrown out of Ireland at the start of the 10th century. And the interpretation of this is they come across the Irish Sea and finish up in the Lake District. And so we end up with hordes of Viking graves and things like that. And this is a very Viking looking place, like anything else you can really. And I suspect very strongly it would be nice to test it. I'm sure. So that's what I'm up to at the moment. As I said, we've not done very much from Britain, so I'm hoping to go over to Ireland, look at some material from the National Museum there. We do a bit more from Western Scotland as well. But we have got, as I mentioned, we've got cones from doing all this work in Denmark. We've got a lot of cones from Norway, and surprisingly, they do everything tested in Norway with reindeer antler. We tested some material from some sites in central Sweden as well. So a late Viking place called Sigtuna. We're hoping to look at some material from Birka, which is another one of the early Viking towns there as well. We've looked at some cones a bit further east. So in Estonia, there's a very famous, quite recent find a ship burial at Salmen, which is a pre-Viking but very Viking-looking ship burial. And it looks like it's a kind of some kind of raiding class with a diplomatic mission that's going on, and all these Vikings are kind of deposited in this grave in parapets. And there's lots of bones in 2 boats with lots of swords and lots of coats. And so we've tested the cones from reindeer, and they started to look like Sweden, so that's quite nice to find. So a few other extra objects from Estonia as well. And we have done some material from Iceland and Greenland. So nice thing about Iceland is there's long been a story about whether the people who settled on Iceland are really Scandinavians coming directly from Scandinavia, or whether they've come via Britain and Ireland. One of the items looking at the DNA of human bones there is that it might be Scandinavian men coming over with butchering Irish wives or slaves. And the cones really sort of reflect that. We've got an interesting mixture of reindeer, which must be coming from Scandinavia, and red deer, which you all like to think is coming from Britain or Ireland. But there are a couple of weird examples as well. There's one which is made of walrus ivory, and there's another which is made of horse. I've never seen a cone really made of horse really anywhere else in the Viking Age. Not horse and one, honestly. But it's interesting, I think, because in Iceland you get horse is quite an important animal. Lots of the burials in Iceland feature a horse as a grave. So the private code map made out by this kind of process. Which is material in Greenland as well, which we're still looking at the moment. But you can see there's a big area here that we should still work on. But within my job for this year is to start to get hold of material from southern shores of the North Sea. There are a lot of kind of Viking / Slavic kind of trading sites in this area. So I've been talking to colleagues in Poland, stuff like that, and trying to get that material. And that's starting to come together. So the hope is we'll pretty soon have a coverage of this whole area. The one thing that that you might be thinking about is what are the reasons for the edges of that area. We don't tend to find these kind of cones. As you go further in the central or southern Europe, we get cones, but they're not quite the same style. And evidence of kind of Scandinavian contact is kind of hard to find. But I am looking at some material from France and just managed to kind of ascertain that, and there might well be bits and pieces of Scandinavian material in there, but that probably won't be very much. And the other big area we're going to look at would be Ukraine and Russia. But obviously that's not really on the agenda right now. But I think it is quite important to look at our colleagues in Ukraine. I think when they're ready to do it, to come go with this kind of thing, we're willing to collaborate with them, we're very keen to collaborate. But it's obviously it's a difficult subject. Okay, so I thought I'd just kind of leave it there to give a bit of sense of some of the kind of things that we found, to give you a sense that what we've tried to do is take an object which is on the face of pretty, but maybe not that interesting, and see that actually you can use it to answer questions about level of contact in different parts of the world, about the way that objects were made, and even looking at things like when the Viking Age began, the nature of the early Viking Age, where these people were in contact with each other, and try to use things like science, quite small scale, quite limited objects, for some really big question, quite often related by some documents, shares, nothing. See if we can have a slightly different perspective on the question using this techniques. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Stop.
It's going to start, so you can't see my thank you sign, but thank you, everybody. If you want to find out, I'm more than happy to answer a few questions. There we go. If you want to find out more, I've got quite a few books on this kind of subject. This book is in the shop downstairs. Okay. Beware, a Viking way of life is actually about code. Wasn't my title. But a couple of other books as well about something about craft and Middle Ages. This is a nice little book that I published a few years ago, which is a picture book of nice artifacts from Viking Age, but has a lot of these arguments in there. And the most recent book is this, edited with a colleague, Søren Sindberg, is Crafts and Social Networks in Viking Towns, which is all about the ways in which we can use objects and the way that people made objects to understand connectivity between the way that communicate. Hopefully, I'll see you much. Thanks very much.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, it seems that most of the gold started in the first room. Is there any evidence of comes for looking at or would they remain simple material?
It's a very good question, and I think something we don't really know that. There's been a kind of assumption that these are hair tones, and I think they probably were. But that's largely based on the fact that we do tend to find, we've got quite often find graves that contain textile tools, and they will have cones with them. Those cones don't look like these. That's the thinking. But I wouldn't go so far to say that they don't have a human purpose. I'm sure they're relatively you get them. Right. And it's also worth saying this is a very much a subset of what they had at the time. So these are made of antler and bone, so they preserve one in the ground in those conditions. If you're making them out of wood or board, they don't preserve. And when we have good condition, we sometimes do find those materials. So it's very likely there's a whole range of other cones out there that don't fit from this. So this would be higher standards. Yeah, it's very likely, yeah. So there's one kind of cone we get right across sort of 10th to 12th century Northern Europe, which for a long time we didn't really know what they were. We used to call them mounts, riveted mounts. They were pieces of bone rib with a single rivet at each end, and they had little nicks along the outside. And it took some colleagues of mine to identify those nicks and probably two cuts. Recognise that what we've got there is the remains of a cone where all the teeth are gone, and just that little plate was delivered. So in all likelihood, the plate on the teeth of it. And there are a couple of examples we actually have that preserved, but there's literally two examples. I think of one red and one white, and whereas you have hundreds of these mounts, to just give you a sense of the amount of sugar we have lost.
There's another hand went, okay.
Would they have used reindeer for food and as a byproduct using antler for that? Or did it become an industry and reindeer were then culled for the antlers?
It's a fantastic question. There's something I've been wrestling with a little bit. One of the things I've started to get involved in recently is starting to work with people who are looking at the other end of this chain, who are up in the mountains in Scandinavia, looking at these tracking systems. So there's a fantastic project called Secrets of the Ice. And they're finding materials in the mountains of Norway, and where climate change is meaning that the ice is melting. And that means that things that were trapped in the ice 500, 1,000, 2,000 years ago are melting out. And they're finding all sorts of incredible evidence of really well preserved things like complete arrows, the arrow shaft as well, shoes, and all sorts of things, and mapping it across the mountain passes. And it gives a sense of how that kind of landscape was being used, which we didn't have a few years ago. But no one's really put that together at the end that I've been looking at, which is the object made of this stuff. And so I've been talking with Flex and joined all this stuff together. And it's a complicated situation. So in Britain, the assumption had always been that most of the amulets being used for making is naturally shed. People collect rather than and there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that you very rarely find the remains of deer bones in the towns when you find them. So it's not like whole carcasses being coming in, it's coming in into the meat, and then the antler is being used as a byproduct. That doesn't seem to be the case. But it's also based on the fact that if you've got the basal part of the antler from the bird, you can tell whether it's been chopped off with an axe, whether it's been naturally ruptured. And so one thing people quite often did was to count and quantify how many of these are naturally shed birds and how many of them are butchered. And they were generally dominated by naturally shed birds. The problem I have with that question is that it relies on you having that bird. And if it's been processed a long way before it gets to you, which if I was going to transport antler for a long way, I would cut it pretty short legs, so you'd have to carry these things a bit like that. And if you did that, then you wouldn't necessarily get those birds. So it's a little bit unclear, but in Britain it seems like it's dominated by natural material. In Scandinavia, I don't think they really know, and different people say different things. And for a long time, if you read my way of life book, I can't remember actually when I said it. I wrote it so long ago, but I think I probably am a combination of hunting and collection. I mean, I'll probably say the same thing now, but I think hunting is a very big part of it. largely because the scale of the traffic is going up. They have these great big kind of areas of pictures, which seem to be lined up across the mountains to directly intersect the routes of the ranging government and the migrations. And it's on such a scale, it must be organised. And there's long been a question of who's doing this. Is this the North? Is it the native Sami? It certainly looks like it's got organisation behind it, and it must be done to drive what's going on in the town. It must be producing it down to the town. But there are very few areas where we can really see that together with evidence from kind of skinning and butchery or stuff like that. So in the later medieval period, you get a completely different approach where they're really kind of going on some scale to catch large amounts of rain. And they're almost like kind of great game drivers. They drive into a kind of a funnel and then they butcher them with gruesome ways to see. And with that, we do have some bone sandwiches which seem to have a mixture of antler and butchered bone as well. But the Viking Age don't really have that, so we've kind of working with a kind of quite a lot of missing information. My suspicion is that it's neither one sort. It's probably associated with actually regular skin as well. That must be. I mean, if you go into actually have to regular. I'm not going to take the skin and leave the antler. I'll take the antler. But the degree to which that's also associated with meat, I don't know. Probably you could let the meat and you could dry it, and then you can train it like that as well. But I think it's quite organised production of increasing scale every time. The other thing which is interesting, and try to make sense of this, is actually how it's being moved around. So we know that some radial outflow is getting from that northern area to Riga. We don't know exactly how it's getting there. So it's reaching Riga at a point, certainly early on in the 8th century, and that's before we got one of the other Viking towns, basically Kalkan, in southeast of Norway. That's the obvious major port in the kind of like Norway. But the stuff in Riga is getting there before Kalkan exists. But also I was commissioner at Kalkan, and I don't remember having any ratings. There was no rating around there at all. And we also looked very carefully about what evidence of third bearing elements, because we knew there'd been work. Yeah, no, and one of these Viking towns would have lots and lots of third bearing elements that would be recognised as a place where first being brought into the process and before we shipped out from the places. We looked deliberately at that, and we didn't find it. And we also there's no radio. So I was starting to think, what's going on? Why is it not coming from Kalkan? It must be then. I suspect there are also other places on the kind of Norwegian coast, perhaps, that we haven't found yet, that were kind of transshipment places. There's a lot of people working on this up in Norway trying to work out exactly how this is all organised, because there's an increasing recognition that this, what they call the outfield area, is much more exploited, much earlier than we thought in previous ones. They're finding things like production of pitch and tar, which they're making from burning trees, basically. So we thought that was happening from about the Viking Age. Now we know that's happening much earlier on. Iron production will be happening earlier on as well. We're exporting stone. We're using things like whetstones for sharpening from these areas as well. So these kind of mountainous areas are being kind of exploited from quite early on, quite a scale. And what we don't yet know is how it's organised. One thing that's been quite a big change in the last few years. Norway has started to really kind of build a lot of vegetative focus as well, which like to do with Britain. So there's been a number of sites found in these kind of mountainous areas, often associated with rivers, where you've got strange, unexpected collections of metal coins and imported objects that suggest that somebody really wealthy outside. So they're probably best interpreted, I guess, as some sort of transshipment site that people are durable animals and coming down with their radio skins and the vesicles and the antlers and whatever, and then trading it on to somewhere else. But we really started very young.
Anyone got any? Yeah.
Were these high status? For all that,
Certainly not for us.
second question. With throwaway items, are they male or female? So we don't know who's, and third question, do you know from them? Children, it comes, do you know?
So I don't think there's an order. So certainly not throwaway items. We know that they. I mean, part of that is logical, based on knowing how long it takes to make them and the amount of raw materials that go into them. So if we can take today as an analogy, people who make homes today, these kind of homes, some of them in aftermarket, it takes them a couple of days to make them. They sell them for a couple of £100 each. So that might give you a bit of a sense, not a direct analogy, but give you a bit of a sense. The other thing is that we know that they do seem to have some kind of special association because they go into graves quite frequently. Wherever you get, in Scandinavia in particular, where you get a grave goods in it, swords or weaving equipment or whatever, quite few find homes as well. Sometimes those cones seem to be unused when they've gone into the grave, so they've either been kept as a kind of special item, or they've been perhaps maybe probably for the grave, who knows. So that's kind of the kind of theories, I guess, for suggesting that they're not wrong. I don't think they're only very high retail value. Probably, if you're in Scandinavia, if you're a free individual, expect you have a code of some sort, but what kind of code do you have on dependent levels, depending on level of status. The male-female question is interesting because there are certain sorts of code which seem to be associated with graves with men, and a certain sort that seem to be associated with women. So some of the big ones that I showed, you very frequently find those in female graves, not exclusively, but quite often. And smaller ones, you often find them in male graves. They often come with a little case, and we also find them in context which you might think of as being male contact. So the place in Birka in Sweden, which is referred to as garrison, it seems the kind of exceedingly where all the military equipment is kept. And there you find little deposits of cones like this and the cases that go with them. They seem to be part of almost like a soldier's kit, perhaps. The problem is there's a chronological difference there as well. So the ones that you think of as being maybe female from before the ones you think of as being male. That can't be right. So there's a bit of work that we did on that. So you're right. When we need those great contacts. Tell us the sense actually. The question of DNA, that might be the sort of thing we get to eventually, I think. The issue at the moment is that DNA, even if you're trying to get the DNA of the animal that made the animal, the DNA itself, if that's what it offers, it's a bit hit and miss whether you get DNA out of it or not. It's not always not preserved. If you're looking for the DNA of the individual preserved on the teeth of the comes from their hair, and it's even more of a kind of a lottery ticket whether you're going to get it or not. But that might be the sort of thing you get to eventually. There have been some kind of clever things that have been done with this sort of thing. So in some parts of the world they found remains of mice on the teeth. You don't tend to have that on the Viking Age. The Viking are quite coarse. I actually don't really think they're probably much to do with mice. They're probably more about just person really big ahead of Britain. They're quite coarse. If you look at Roman codes or medieval codes, they're much more fine. They look more like a modern knit code. And where we've looked for it, there are a few occasions where we actually have found the eggs. So it might be an area for future study.
Actually, putting these cones in grades is a very good part of something the person used, you wouldn't find any hair traces on them.
No.
So it's special.
Yeah. So there's also a difficulty in that the amount of people studying this kind of object is quite small.
And so there hasn't been a massive amount of research. So in Scandinavia, this was quite popular area in the 90s. Since then, there's not that much going on, and certainly very scientific work, there's not that much happening really. So one of the things which would be really nice to see happen would be a really kind of long, extended focus study using experimentally made cones. Look at how long it takes to get wear traces. Because what I can do is I can look at a cone of the grave and I can say that cone's got no wear on it, or that cone's got a lot of wear on it. But I don't know that lot of wear equals 2 weeks or 10 years. And I don't know whether the no wear means it's never been used or whether it's been used for 5 years. So that work still needs to be done. And I've tried several times to put together student projects actually, kind of looking at combing the hair every day for 2 years to see what happens. So what I can tell is that over the course of a student combing the hair between years, you don't get the So we need either a long range project or some clever robot which combs the hair constantly or something, and that kind of gives us kind of accelerated data. But this is sort of very other parts of other periods and other types of objects. Our understanding of how wear patterns develop is much more developed than this. It's a big area.
I think that's everyone's questions done. Oh, thank you very much. That was wonderful.